Okay. Okay, so welcome to the Using Social Media to Engage Youth in Harm Reduction's Influencers Perspective panel. And thanks to the live audience, as well as those who are watching the recording for choosing to spend your time here with us today. And just a little bit about why we want to talk about this topic and why we invited Mackenzie, Jess, and Avery. So as you may know, substance use among youth has been gradually increasing over the past years in the province of British Columbia in Canada, where I'm currently at right now. In 2021 was like the deadliest year in the overdose crisis, with more than 2,000 lives lost, which is a 26% increase since 2020. And in the same year, the youngest victim of the overdose crisis was reported to be only 12 years old in BC. Therefore, we think that it's very important to find appropriate solutions that are easily accessible by youth. And this brings us to the topic of social media, which are platforms where, as you all may know, that this is where majority of youth and more than half of the world's population use not only for entertainment, communication purposes, but also to stay updated and to learn and get support. So today we invited three individuals, again, Mackenzie, Jess, and Avery, these are those who use social media platforms to create contents that help spread awareness on the overdose crisis and substance use. And they're here today to share their work as well as their perspective on how harm reduction should be shaped on social media to best combat the overdose crisis among youth. So it's my great pleasure to introduce again Avery from Project One Life, Mackenzie from Kenzie Kate Songs, and Jess from Party Safer with Jess. So I guess I'll just tag Mackenzie. Do you mind letting us know a bit more about yourself, your work, and after that you can tag Jess or Avery. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everybody. Thank you. This is such a well-attended, such a successful virtual event. I've done these before, and usually it's like me and the moderator. This is poppin'. My name is Mackenzie, and I'm a harm reductionist and based in Vancouver, BC. And my background is in drugs and society. I attended Quest University, which is a bit of an unconventional arts and sciences university based in Squamish, BC. And it allowed me to study drugs and society from an interdisciplinary perspective, which was amazing and exactly what I wanted. So my main focus was neuropsychopharmacology, but I also spent a lot of time trying to understand the war on drugs from a couple of different perspectives, including like sociology, English, history, human geography, trying to understand the social, legal, as well as medical dimensions of drug use in all of its forms. And I began working in the overdose crisis intervention space about when I graduated in 2018. Most of my experience has been through my work with an organization. It's a cooperative called Brave, and they're a technological co-op that basically builds systems to detect and prevent overdoses for people who are using in isolation. And at the time when I was working for them, they had like a button system that you can install in supported housing units so that there's like a lot of overdoses in spaces like that. And then there's a contactless sensor. Anyway, the details aren't that important, but it's to say that a lot of my work was around how to try to detect and prevent overdoses remotely when somebody's disconnected from their community. And then I also helped launch Canada's first overdose prevention hotline. It's called NORS, the National Overdose Response Service. And I've also been a volunteer at NORS, so like helping people remotely, answering their calls and initiating an emergency response if they become undetected. And I did the same thing at Brave with their app, which is basically a web-based version of the same thing. And I also sit on the editorial board at Folklore. And then I also made a TikTok video that went viral one time. And I must confess that I do not identify as an influencer or even as somebody that's particular social media savvy, but I had a few videos that did well on TikTok. So here I am.
Do you mind tagging just anyone?
Oh yeah, I always forget to do that. I'm so sorry. Jess, would you like to go next?
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. So hi, everyone. I'm Jess. I am a harm reduction educator and content creator. I haven't been a content creator for that long. I got started at the beginning of the pandemic, so like March or April 2020. And the reason I started posting harm reduction content online, I have been an officer with my local Dance Safe chapter for about 6 years now. Dance Safe is a 501c3 nonprofit that aims to promote health and safety in the nightlife community. So we go to like music festivals and raves, and we do peer-to-peer drug education, drug checking. We provide free water, electrolytes, condoms, earplugs, things like that. So obviously when COVID happened, I could no longer do that anymore. And I had downloaded TikTok out of boredom and realized what an amazing educational tool it was. And so I just started posting harm reduction content on there. And kind of like Mackenzie, I had a TikTok blow up, and here I am 2 years later, still doing it. I love it. Other than that, I have my master's in public health. I didn't have a focus, but I focused like all of my projects on harm reduction. I had also interned with Dance Safe, working to get testing materials legalized state, across the country and each state. Lots of states in the United States, they're still illegal, including fentanyl test strips. So I worked on an initiative to get those legalized, and also worked to get them legalized in my home state of Pennsylvania. And yeah, that's about it. So I guess I'll tag Avery.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name's Avery Kalafatas. I'm 16, and I founded Project One Life, which is a soon-to-be 501c3. It's fairly new. Nonprofit that works to spread awareness about the dangers of fentanyl specifically, but all overdose and poisoning issues specifically among youth. And it also works to empower young people to educate themselves about the dangers of fentanyl and illicit drugs. So it's based primarily, like it's a national program right now working. We have ambassadors in about 20 different states, all working on different ways to spread awareness in their community. So it's mainly focused with integrating younger people into spreading the word and getting these people to take projects into their own hands. We have one ambassador right now who is actually working on a speech for elementary school parents to start talking to their kids about the dangers of fentanyl, which is a really sad reality. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to accept, but that's one of the key benefits of working with a lot of young people. All of our ambassadors are between, our youngest is 13, our oldest is around 24. And then aside from that program, we also work through social media, which is where this conference comes in, primarily through TikTok and Instagram, since our key audience is the younger age group. So a lot of informational TikTok videos, specifically warnings to certain groups. We've had a lot of interaction with specific warnings to, like, Los Angeles recently. There was just a big fentanyl seizure in Asheville. So warning people that obviously there's fentanyl everywhere, but those specific areas, like this month or however long, it's important to be especially high alert for that sort of thing. So yeah, it's primarily promoted through Instagram and TikTok. And I created this nonprofit. Just my family was really touched by the fentanyl epidemic specifically, and I became hyper aware of how little young people knew, given how big of an issue it was, and this reluctance among older groups to start getting that information out young, in fear of like being too early. And I'm really just a strong believer that you can never be too early with this sort of thing, especially when it's taking as many lives as it is in all over the world now.
Thanks for all your very great, very detailed introduction. So I was wondering, since it's like this session is focused on social media and how we can use it to promote, like just to do harm reduction work, I was wondering, what do you three think that makes social media such a good platform for you to spread the word, especially for youth?
I can start us off. I think a theme that all of us touched on was TikTok specifically. I found that it's just like within an hour, I can reach like up to 700,000 people in like the younger demographic, specifically about some important messages. I have a few, I can share them, of examples of things that we've done. So I think that just getting people that awareness, and especially with TikTok, it can move through people and communities a lot quicker than other messages, is why it's so important.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I found that the virality of TikTok is just, I mean, that's sort of like what I was talking about, why it's such an amazing educational tool. There is an age limit on TikToks. You're supposed to be 13 and over. I don't think that a lot of people follow that. But that's okay. I've gotten a lot of hate comments from people saying, you know, why are you teaching kids how to use, why are you teaching how to use drugs on a kids app? So I think that's a huge challenge of using social media to do this work. But, you know, as Avery sort of said, you know, you're never too young to start learning about this stuff. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, like, kids are on social media, they're using it for entertainment, they're using it for connection, and it is I think the single best way to reach people, and to reach people quickly.
I agree, and would just add that in addition to sort of like the reach, there's also, I mean, it's also great. I think this is kind of saying what both of you already said, that the specific demographics who are using those platforms, it's a great way to directly get in touch with them. And then I think there's also this component of like, there are certain places in particular in like rural communities where there isn't necessarily a super strong harm reduction community, and use of drugs is like even more stigmatized than it already is in like urban centers such as Vancouver, or where, I don't know, I can't think of another example, but I think that social media can provide a really important lifeline to youth who don't, like, one thing that I'm sure you two come up against all the time, and I feel like I need to repeat until I'm blue in the face, is like teaching people how to be safe does not encourage drug use. We know that from so much data across so many different contexts. And so for people who are using drugs, they're going to use drugs regardless of whether or not they see somebody on TikTok showing them how to be safe while they're doing it. So again, it's just sort of like prudent harm reduction to try to use social media to reach people who otherwise might not have access to like safer use practices.
And I would
Yeah,
also
I
just,
agree.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Avery.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to add, I think it's also an amazing way to do peer-to-peer education, because I think in, you know, like Mackenzie said, a lot of people who might be in more rural areas, they're likely only getting drug education from adults, if they're getting any drug education at all. But yeah, a lot of the times youth are only getting drug education from adults, teachers, things like that. So I think being able to, you know, see peers teaching about this kind of thing is really important, because it, you know, it's easier to connect, it's easier to relate, and I think that they're going to be more likely to listen to someone who's closer to their age.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the youth to youth aspect of it is really important, like Jessica was saying. And I think one thing too that was touched on is so many of these programs run by adults and older people run by schools are so focused on abstinence, which of course is like the ideal situation. Like if we all had it our way, I'm sure no one would be using drugs at all, but it's a part of growing up. Experimenting is a natural part of our upbringing. It's a natural part of what happens. It's been going on for years, and it's just a different ball game now with all of these different things being put into drugs in the face of fentanyl. It's just a different time, and it's a matter of limiting those deaths and accepting that like this is inevitable, which I think is really hard for some people, and that's where the youth to youth conversation can be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks for your answers. And I know that you've touched on like what you do, but I was wondering, how do you think your work has impact youth currently?
I actually have no idea. I don't know if like comments or likes are a reliable way to like measure impact on social media or not. And it's not something I really track that much in any case. One thing that I think it's been important for, in addition to sort of what all three of us spoke to just now about like reaching people who might not otherwise have these resources or these access to safe practices to keep them from getting hurt unnecessarily, is that I notice a lot of people commenting things that make me think that they haven't really had a chance to connect with other people about how they've been personally impacted by the opioid poisoning crisis. And a lot of comments being like, oh, I wish I'd seen this like a few months ago. And those ones are always really hard to see, especially because every single overdose death is preventable. There's no reason anybody ever needs to die from an overdose death, except if they're basically using an isolation and somebody just doesn't know that there might be a need for naloxone on the other side of the door. But I think that I like to think, again, this is not verified by any academic process, but like based on reading comments and my very biased reading of them, I like to think that social media has maybe given some people a chance to feel seen, to feel that this like opioid crisis isn't something that's like happening in the abstract. It's something that's impacting real people. And those people are commenting and sharing their stories about how it's impacted them. And so in addition to sort of like hopefully equipping people with real ways of being safer in the world, which is implied, I also hope that it's like sort of functions as a forum, I think, for connection.
Yeah, sort of along those same lines, it's definitely hard to tell like what your actual impact is and how many people you're impacting. But I think just based on the sheer numbers, it would be, it would almost be impossible to not have taught someone something. And I get messages of people being like, I used your advice during the last time I went out to a party or a festival, and like we tested this batch and it ended up coming back positive for fentanyl. Like, thank you so much for, sharing this knowledge with us, because it literally saved our lives. So I get messages similar to that all the time. And I guess that's really like the only thing I can go off of to really know if I'm making a difference. And also like comments and stuff like Mackenzie said.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you have said. I'm just going to share. I have some examples of posts that we have been using. So I'm just going to share this quickly. So my whole theory around this is it just takes the right person seeing it one time. So we have things like this being put out on social media, and yes, it's reaching thousands and thousands of people, but again, it just takes one right person, and ultimately the goal is to reduce overdoses. And like Jessica was saying, is like save that one life. Like, again, every single overdose is preventable. So it's just getting these things out there, having them be very normalized, having it be something that people have heard about a number of times. This is some of our Instagram content as well. And I think one thing that I've found is again, like as I'm reading these comments, which was touched on, having discussions within them, some of which definitely are a bit questionable, but a lot of which are really constructive and allow people to make that connection, specifically younger people, and have those relationships and continue talking outside of the post and hear of people in the same situation, which I think can be really impactful.
Right. Sorry, Pen and Ching, do you mind if we just discuss these questions first, and then in about like 20 minutes, you will have like 20 minutes to kind of like interact with the speakers later on. You could also like type in your questions in the chat box as well, if that's okay. All right, so as you know, that social media probably has, as you already mentioned, a lot of potentials. However, there are probably also some limitations. And one of those is there has been like a lot of speculations around the spread of misinformation on social media. So how did you ensure that you're not spreading misinformation? And what would be your advice for social media users, particularly youth, when it comes to protecting themselves from this misinformation?
Personally, I try to just stay as neutral as possible. And, regardless of my opinion on a substance, I will try to give the good and the bad, because most drugs have some kind of therapeutic potential, or they're used for some kind of therapeutic purpose. Or people have benefited from them in some way. So it's not just, for me, it's not just about harm reduction, but benefit maximization in some cases. So I like to show the good and the bad. I always do tons of research before I post anything, to make sure that I'm not spreading any misinformation. And I think that, I guess my advice to youth would be to make sure that posts that people are making are backed up by sources, and not to just blatantly trust people on the internet, including myself. It's definitely hard to know who to trust. Make sure that people have a reputable background, and that the information that they're providing is backed up in some way. But that's hard. It's really hard. It's really hard to know who to trust.
I was thinking along really similar lines when I was thinking about this question ahead of the session, because when I try to do a similar thing as you, Jess, where I happen to have the privilege of sort of I've been to university and I have some degree of science literacy, so I know how to find things, and then I know how to interpret the data, and I know how to contextualize it. But obviously not everybody has that privilege. And so I feel like in terms of advice, all I could say is for people to treat social media, because social media is great in a lot of ways. And of course there are limitations to social media because of how short form, for example, TikTok videos are. There's not a lot of room for nuance or rigor or caveats in the videos you're making. And so I feel like the best advice that I can think of is just to treat any sort of piece of information you see anywhere like TikTok or Instagram as simply a jumping off point. And then it's kind of a matter of luck, because it really depends on the people you're surrounded with. I would say try to find somebody trustworthy to discuss it with, but then how do you assess trust if you're not necessarily surrounded by people that have taught you critical thinking skills, for example, or you haven't been to university and maybe didn't learn it in that setting. It's just, I feel like how far you're going to get just from talking to people in your community will really vary between communities, and not every community is into harm reduction. And so I don't really know beyond just people doing their best to try to think as critically as they can with the tools they have.
And how about Avery? Do you have any thing to add on to this question?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot of what's been said, just making sure, again, like checking multiple sources, credible sources, not speaking on things when it's too early. I know a lot of the times when there will be these big legal things going on around opioids, there'll be a lot, just floods of misinformation because there's simply not much information yet. And people sort of fill in those corners. So I think making sure, like Kenzie and Jessica have said, making sure that there are multiple sources, credible sources, and that it's okay to wait an extra day for more information to come out.
And
Can I add one thing?
yeah, for
Avery
sure.
just made me think of something that I think I want to highlight. Is that I think that, I mean, I don't know if this is reasonable advice to prescribe in this kind of like glib way, but in addition to sort of like everything that everybody else has said, if people are in a position where they can teach themselves how to begin assessing the credibility of various sources, I feel like that would be the single biggest thing that would help them in making sense of just like developing both social media literacy, but also sort of fighting disinformation, because it's really on social media, you have to learn how to like assess the credibility of whatever information source you're using there too. And like yeah, I'm gonna stop there.
No, I agree, but I think too, sometimes it's hard. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the recent Ashley Moody case. It was someone involved with the DEA, a wife of a DEA agent came forward and shared a ton of misinformation about ISO that led to all sorts of confusion around it being a new and upcoming drug, when in reality it's been around, it's just becoming more popular. And I think being aware of things like that, which is definitely hard when I think a lot of people who are in power also struggle with that credibility and misinformation.
All right. So other than misinformation, do you think that social media have any addition like limitations, and how would you address it as someone who's creating content on their yeah.
Another huge issue is censorship on basically all social media platforms, and sort of the view that harm reduction is promoting drug use in some way, when of course that it's not. I know that purely harm reduction based videos have been taken down for violating community guidelines, which only state that you can't promote drug use or promote the sale of drugs, which obviously harm reduction isn't doing either of those things. So there's no reason why videos that are made about harm reduction should be taken down. So I think that is a huge barrier for this type of information to be spread. And there's obviously, there are some ways around it, like sort of censoring yourself, censoring the words that you use, but that kind of creates accessibility issues in some cases. So I guess the way that I would fix it would, and I hope that we're working towards this as harm reduction becomes more normalized, which I think it is just to sort of separate harm reduction from what is actually promoting or like glamorizing drug use. And like I said, I think as we sort of harm reduction becomes more normalized, and unfortunately, I think that is an effect of the overdose crisis. I think that the censorship will become less and less of an issue, hopefully.
Does Mackenzie or okay.
Yeah, I think one thing that was really well put. I agree with all of that and have struggled with a lot of those same things. I think another thing that's like a bit of a double-edged sword with the like peer-to-peer the peer-to-peer sort of like dimension of social media is that I think that in some ways it allows people who use drugs to like author their own stories and to sort of like be leaders and public faces of harm reduction, which is, I think, how it should be. And one thing that I've learned from working at places like the Overdose Prevention Society or Brave, or other places around town sort of like that, is that people who use drugs are the experts. Like, they are the ones who know how to keep themselves safe. They're the ones who know what is going to work and what isn't going to work in terms of like interventions and policy adoptions. And almost one for one, every single thing that a person who uses drugs or groups, activist groups such as Vandu, for example, have suggested as interventions ultimately end up being adopted by the state because they're incredibly effective. And they typically end up being adopted after like repeated acts of civil disobedience by people using drugs, and collective action. So having illicit pop-up safe injection sites because people using drugs were like, this will help. And the state kept shutting it down. And then one day they like studied it and they were like, oh, turns out they were right. It works really, really well. And there have been like no death. There's been maybe one death in like the entire world at a safe injection site. And so in my work, something that has become really important professionally, which feels separate in social media in some ways, is to always be centering people who use drugs in every conversation and making sure they're at every table to share their ideas and their input, because I just think that those are the folks who really have the wisdom, and also for justice reasons, I think their voices should be centered. And I think that one sort of drawback of social media is that somebody like me who does not visibly, like if somebody saw me on the street, I don't think that they would see me and think like that person uses drugs. I have a lot of things about me that confer privilege based on how I look. I'm white, I'm straight passing, I have all my teeth, I don't like, my skin's pretty good, like all of these sort of things you would look at and typically use to categorize somebody as a drug user or not. I don't have to deal with the consequences of those sort of markers. And I think that that means that somebody's voice like mine gets amplified when I know because I've seen it. There are people who are in a far better position than I am to speak about harm reduction and what works and how to keep people safe in your community, whose videos aren't going to take off on TikTok because they don't look like I do. Or people will see them and discredit them thinking that they look like, quote unquote, a junkie or something like that, which is actually, if anything, like a qualifying, it's a qualifier rather than like a criteria for sort of discreditation. So anyway, I think that that's sort of social media, like the rest of society, sort of has systems of like privilege and oppression built into it, and certain voices get amplified over others to the exclusion of people's voices who I think should really be at the center, but we can't control the algorithms that put people's faces or voices in front of more people. So I don't really know how to solve that, but I think it's a really important thing to name.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and also really have been dealing with the censorship aspect of things, as Jessica talked about. I've had my account banned for like weeks at a time because of, like, again, spreading harm reduction information, which I just think is really unfortunate. And I too am struggling with the ways to best go about that. Obviously changing, like altering the posts with that in mind, but in the bigger picture of things, looking at ways that maybe there can be another step before censoring something and really differentiating like promotion of illegal goods from like a harm reduction post or like safe use post. And yeah, that was my main point for this one as well.
Yeah, so actually, I also work on our own social media account, which is for the Addiction Concurrent Disorder Research Group. And what I find is that I also have to kind of like not use certain words, like even hashtags, they would not, like, for example, I can't just use like overdose crisis, but then they will like limit people to actually reach like that hashtag. So only those who follow that hashtags can see it. But then, yeah, so if I use like certain words, like, yeah, again, like overdose crisis, probably my post won't be spread as widely as like other types of content. So I can totally relate to that as well. So for Mackenzie's point, when you were saying like how you want to center the people who actually have the experience of like overdose and who actually use substances, how do you think we as like social media content creator or influencers, or however you like to identify as, how do you amplify their voices? How would you bring those kind of those voices that are being maybe oppressed, like not represented as widely? How do you bring those voices to more people?
I think that one sort of bit of pre-work that's really important to do is to sort of like disambiguate addiction from overdose, because I think there's a sort of assumption that it sounds like I'm contradicting what I just said, but I'm not. I think that there's an assumption that the people who are overdosing are people who struggle with substance use disorders, but as Avery said, and as Jess has pointed out as well, you do not have to be an IV drug user to be at risk of overdose, because we are living with a poison drug supply. And so I think that one half of the work is having people who maybe don't look like conventional drug users, such as myself, own the fact that they are recreational drug users, to sort of destigmatize drug use and to sort of get people to understand that drug use is like, I think maybe a better way of saying it is to get people to understand that like people should have agency and autonomy, and they should have the right to be alive in exercising that autonomy and agency. So if somebody is opting to use opioids and it improves the quality of their life and it manages their pain, they shouldn't have a death sentence because of that. And I think, where was I going with that? I guess, yeah, the first half is to sort of, for people who do have the privilege or the option of like hiding that they might be using drug use, to do their part in destigmatizing it by owning that they also use drugs. And this is also what a drug user can look like. And so I actually meant to say that at the beginning, that I am a person that uses recreational drugs, and I'm a person that uses pharmaceutical drugs that I'm prescribed that are like one molecule different from crystal meth. But the way that I move through the world gets to be so different because of my relationship to those drugs and because of how I look. And so I think that's one half that's really important. And then honestly, I don't know if there's a way to like hack the algorithm to make it promote things besides the sort of like prevailing or like ideas of like hegemonic femininity or white supremacy. Like, I don't know if we can like make the algorithms not do that because it's so highly rewarded. So maybe if you can get your account to a place where you typically get enough views, like the algorithm knows that people are going to like the content, that like you can surprise it with a video from somebody who, if they maybe tried posting something, they wouldn't get as much, because again, they would be able to be like visually categorized as a person that uses drugs. That would be a good way to sort of get the message out. And then maybe if somebody like built up a brand specifically around like destigmatization and like fighting these ideas, I think that could get like a good following. And I also think that would require some like equity steps. So for example, ensuring that people who use drugs have access to smartphones. And there's a number of reasons why that would be important beyond just like the destigmatization and voice centering thing. But those are a couple of ideas off the top of my head. Sorry, that was really long.
No, you're adding to this discussion, so don't say sorry about that. So does Jess or Avery, do you want to add anything to that, or we can move on to our question and answer part of the session? So anyone from the audience can ask us any question. But yeah, Jess.
Yeah, just really quick. I fully agree with everything Mackenzie said about, people who, privileged people who may not look like drug users sort of coming out as drug users. But I do want to acknowledge that it is a privilege in itself to even be able to do that, because a lot of people have jobs where they could be fired from that job before coming out as a person who uses drugs. The only other thing that I could think of to add to the discussion is to just, if you see a video of someone who might look more stereotypically like a person who uses drugs, to interact with their video, to engage with their video. And that's really the only way that you can like hack the algorithm. I mean, it's probably like $1 billion algorithm and you're one person against it. So it's really hard, and it might not make that much of a difference, but it can make a small incremental difference in that video being boosted out.
All right, thank you for your answers. And now we're going to move on to just the question and answer part. So anyone who has a question, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask your questions to our speakers here, or you can also leave your questions in the chat. Yes, Jing Lian, if I'm saying your name wrong, please just correct me with that.
Yeah, that's right. It's Jing Lian, J-I-N-G, like Jingle Bell. It's a Chinese name. Yeah. So I really enjoy the conversation, and I'm very impressed with all your influencers. I'm working on a YouTube channel, and I'm 49 years old this year. So so help me to understand, like, I heard like YouTube is like the second largest searching engine, but you guys all kind of working on TikTok. And is that like something special for the youth or young people? It like help me to understand. I'm not familiar with the social media. So TikTok, is that like all shorts, like 60 seconds? Okay. Because I'm doing kind of like a part-time YouTuber academy with Ali Abdul. He's a Cambridge medical graduate, but he quit in medicine. Anyway, so he was saying, like, because we're talking about how do I know who is watching me or what kind of influence, right? He was saying, like, with YouTube, like the algorithm or the system can kind of give you the stats, like who is watching, who is subscribing, who drop it, and who is attracting, like recommending, suggesting what kind of video and all that. So I felt it's kind of important to know, like, because we want to reach the young people and their family, like educate them and empower them to kind of help themselves. I'm just like trying to understand, like TikTok is really big in China. So I didn't realize that like you guys are so effective on TikTok, which is great.
Yeah, I think that's great what you're doing. Just to answer your first question about the length of TikToks, it's generally pretty short. I think 60 seconds, I would say, is even on the longer end. I believe you can put up to 3 minutes, but the majority of videos you'll see as you're scrolling are maybe like around 10 seconds. I don't know for sure, but they're definitely a lot quicker than YouTube. And I think, oh, Jess just said it's up to 10 minutes now. But it's definitely a lot shorter. And I think that's why so many people can see so many things quickly. I do think, though, YouTube is still a great place to upload longer videos. And I think what you were saying about like seeing who's viewing and subscribing, there's not quite as much like clear like analysis on that through TikTok, but there is a bit in terms of like where they live. I think you can see the ages of people interacting, how many people see it. Those sort of things I think are similar, but probably not as quite precise. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, I know that Jess, you have like over 1.7 million likes, or like almost like 100,000 followers on TikTok. So do you want to add anything to this conversation?
Yeah, I think YouTube is a much harder platform to use and to grow on. I'm not trying to like discourage you from using it or to like encourage you to use TikTok instead or anything. Like it's a great platform. It's, it's a great way to educate people. I just think it's harder to grow, and I think it's harder to get your videos seen by people. And I also think that it's probably this is an assumption, but I would say that YouTube is probably an older audience, but I could be totally off base there. That's the only thing I have to add.
My understanding, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Mackenzie. No, like I really like your input. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that my understanding is that there is like that YouTube is quite diverse in terms of demographics, and there are like youth that are using it quite a bit. But what I have learned is that you wouldn't really be able to like make a video on TikTok and then use the same one on YouTube. Like you would kind of need to be like producing content independently for each channel because they're quite different formats. So and each format sort of like I feel like for YouTube and TikTok there is sort of like a formula for how to like make a viral vid. There are certain like features that really popular TikTok videos tend to have where like there's a person who's like posing it, or not necessarily posing, oftentimes actually is like an authoritative figure that's giving you like a definitive overview of a pithy topic. And then I think TikTok is a little bit, it's a bit of a different format. It's more like, I mean, I think that everybody else here has already covered the TikTok side of things. I don't know if that's actually like related to your question, but I guess you were asking about both of those things, and those are some things to think about if you're trying to consider which one.
No, that's good. That's kind of getting into the technical stuff. But do you mind to share? Like, I really love Avery share her kind of the platform or the popular one. Like, do you mind to just show us one maybe? Like what, like you're like a viral on TikTok. Like, is it do we have time or I just like the information, I can check it out myself. So I felt like whatever works that we can reach the young people and their family, right? So I felt like I'm not like, you know, kind of close or have my own preference. And I do think it's important to kind of equip ourselves so we can be like effective to reach people, right? So I joined that VRA family. I'm not sure if you guys know that, Think Media. So just some courses, right? And the last question, I don't want to take up too much time, but the last question is that, like, are you guys getting some kind of professional help in regard of like a legal stuff or copyright when you're doing this platform, or, you know, having all those creation?
Nope. I was actually really very paranoid when I first started doing this, that like I was gonna somehow get sued for like endangering people or like spreading misinformation or so, like I knew that I wasn't, and I knew that I was helping people, but like, you know, there's always crazy people out there who will take advantage. So I was very, very paranoid about like the whole legal aspect of it. And no, I still don't I still don't have anyone that's like protecting me or anything. Maybe I should.
Yeah, I'm the same way. There's a little bit more protection as I'm applying to be a 501c3 around liability. But I think one thing that's great about the harm reduction community is there's a lot of collaboration and sharing of content is a pretty normal thing I see on the Project One Life account. So I don't worry about any sort of copyright. If anything, I'm happy if someone reposts it because it means that it's just reaching more people and potentially changing more lives.
Yeah. Same.
So if Jessica or Avery, if you want to share any contents, feel free to do that. If not, like we can move on to the next questions that our audience have. So does anyone has a question for our speakers?
I think we had some in the chat early on. I don't know if we want to go back and answer those.
Oh yeah, for sure. So
I also have a question if we have time for Avery and Jess about a censorship thing that I'd be curious to get their thoughts on.
how about let's get to our audience questions first, and then we can go to your question, if that's okay. So I see here that Shay, she asked that, or they asked that, do you hear about online buying of drugs for those using in isolation, and how to determine safety?
I can start off here. I think in terms of youth, that's definitely the primary way of buying drugs. You don't really hear nowadays about people like going down to the street, at least among like where I live and the people I've talked to, and like doing a deal there. I guess in some places, I guess in cities, that could be a way people would do it, but it's mostly through um, Snapchat. I've seen is the major source of that, like buying and selling.
This is Jessica or Mackenzie. Yeah.
I just want to clarify, Shay, in your question, do you mean like, are you asking about specifically like safety measures for when you're buying drugs online?
Yeah, well, I think of different kids that have bought them. Some of them end up in the hospital. Youth don't always do drug testing right away. And I just wondered if there was some kind of thing to present to kids to think about it. If they're going to be dry. I just don't know if kids talk about that, like people ODing after they bought something online and ended up in the hospital. I just don't know if that's a discussion that occurs. I'm just curious.
You were a little muffled, but it sounded like you were saying, yeah, you're just wondering about like, since it's people don't always get drugs tested.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know how people really know who they're getting them from. It's just a different world for youth. And like I know some kids that have ended up in the hospital by buying things off online. And I don't know if there's any kind of safety measures in place around that.
Yeah, I can touch on this because this is what Project One Life is working with a lot. It's unfortunately, like you said, I think there are a lot of accounts people don't know typically who they're buying from, or if they do, like they bought it from someone who bought it from someone. And typically what will happen when you're talking about people ending up in the hospital, what comes to mind for me is fentanyl and poisoning, which is the term that's used if they do not know that something has fentanyl in it. So a lot of the times what will happen and what's so dangerous is a dealer, whether it's like a city distributor, will dilute a batch of cocaine, for example. So they have more of the product, but then add a bit of fentanyl to still give it the kick so the user will get high. And then there's not like quite as obvious of a reason for them to assume anything's wrong with it, presumably. But what happens is as that batch is distributed from a bigger manufacturer who did that process, and then it goes down to a city distributor, and then they may think it's pure and do that process again. And then it ends up having a lethal dose, or the amount of fentanyl, since it is less than the head on a penny, is added into a dose without measuring it properly. It can also become deadly. So that is one of the things that's really dangerous and tricky right now, is that safety. If you look on our website, our new website is going live tomorrow. So I guess if you look tomorrow, or a lot of our social media, there are some ways to tell based on like certain aspects of the pill, but these dealers have been so specialized in making them look identical. They have machines that'll press them into what looks identical to a pharmaceutical Xanax or Percocet. So there's really no way to know. And I think that's definitely where I saw the lack in communication to youth, like you were touching on, and what I'm really working on in telling people like what you're buying. There's no way to know. And yes, there are fentanyl test strips, but unless you're testing the entire substance, there's really no way of knowing, since fentanyl can clump in certain, I don't know if you've heard about the chocolate chip cookie effect. It'll clump. So there's really not any 100% accurate safety measure in terms of that thing, or in terms of that idea. And that's when harm reduction really comes into play.
Can you explain the chocolate cookie effect, just so I can explain it to others? Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, Song for Charlie was who taught me about this. They have a great great post and some information online about it. But essentially, when fentanyl is added to a substance, it will clump together. It's something about like the chemical making of it. I'm not sure. Kenzie would probably know more, since I'm just in high school, but I guess it clumps together within the substance. So I've heard stories of two people going to use, they split a Xanax pill, for example. One half of it is totally safe, and the other half, the person will OD and be in the hospital, like you said. So there's really, it just really depends. And a lot of the times people will get a false sense of hope from these fentanyl test strips if they're not testing the entire product, where they'll cut off a little bit and test that, and it may come back negative because that happened to be the part of the cookie, for say, that did not have the chocolate chip, which would be the fentanyl. I don't know if that made sense.
That makes perfect sense. Thanks for sharing that. That's perfect.
Yeah, of course.
Can I add something to that, Avery?
Yeah, of course.
I think that was so useful in explaining like why there's no such, I don't think there's such a thing as safe use. There's safer use. It's always a matter of like mitigating. And then there's also what Jessica has talked about, which is like benefits maximization, which is sort of like related, but not exactly the same. And I just wanted to add really quick that, so in addition to testing when you can, and specifically like testing isn't going to be perfect, especially if it's in pill form, if it's in powder form. I think you can have better luck with it. And then specifically trying to test, if you can find a place that does like full spectrum chromatography testing, that will tell you like any drugs that are in it beyond just fentanyl, I think is also really important. And then I think that that's sort of like one thing you can do. Another thing you can do that's important is use with people, don't use alone. There's a whole, like, I think Jess will probably have so many useful things to add to this, but there's in my resources, somehow on my speaker page, I added a resource page for remote harm reduction resources. So if you are by yourself and you're planning on using drugs, there are like a number of apps that you can use and phone numbers and hotlines that you can call, and you can do so anonymously, and you give them your like your location, and depending on the one, they all work a bit different. Some of them are anonymous, some of them are just private, where they won't reveal any of your information unless there's a point at which you become unresponsive. And the signs for that are something you would sort of agree to ahead of time. And then they'll initiate an emergency response plan according to your wishes. So there's a bunch of, I can also share that here, but I do have a resource page for those kinds of apps that I think are really important for everyone to have, especially if they don't have access to testing and they're going to use it and they might not have naloxone in the house. And then the other thing is like having naloxone on hand and using in turn, so that if somebody overdoses, there's somebody there who can spot them if something happens and like monitor them just to make sure they're okay. And is there anything else for mitigating online drug ordering that I'm forgetting?
I don't think so. I think you touched a lot of it. One thing I also wanted to add is I don't know a ton about these apps that you can use remotely, but I do know that Let's Talk Overdose is having a webinar. I don't believe it's part of this conference, that is meeting with someone who founded one of these apps. So if that's something you're interested in, that would definitely be a good resource.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. We are approaching the end of this workshop or panel, this session. So would each of you like to give maybe just a last quick take-home message, or just anything that you haven't got a chance to say to the audience? or also you can provide your contact or anything.
Yeah, I guess I would just say, like, support us. If you see, and not just the three of us, but like any harm reduction content creators or people that are posting harm reduction content online, share it, interact with it. That's like really the best thing you can do to increase the visibility and therefore, work towards normalizing this a little bit more, especially in like the social media space. I put my username in the chat, but it's at Party Safer with Jess on TikTok and Instagram.
And for Avery, I can share her information as well here.
Yeah, I think like Jess was saying, I think just continuing to spread the word, have these conversations, and we know it's heart-wrenching. Like it's really hard to talk about. It's definitely a heavy subject, but having those conversations, especially among younger people, so they're equipped with that knowledge. Knowledge is power here, and I think everyone here is interested in one way or another in harm reduction. So I think thank you for that interest and like continuing to push forward in this new and this new mindset of things. And additionally, if you know anyone, this is more specific to Project One Life, who's younger and interested in getting involved, our ambassador program is a great way to start spreading this word and getting introduced to the harm reduction community.
So thank you everyone for joining our session. And Mackenzie, do you want to say anything else or anything?
I'll just reiterate what I put in the chat, which is that in my speaker profile, there was a place you could upload documents, and in there I put a PDF with remote harm reduction resources for anybody who you can share the PDF as is or specific ones to people or whatever, but that will hopefully set up some people in your life with a support network when there's nobody else around and they're trying to keep things on the DL and put themselves in maybe a riskier situation because of it.
Right. So before we end too, I just want to share kind of like our social media accounts as well. If you enjoyed this this conference and you feel like you've learned a lot from this conference and want to see more of our work, feel free to like follow our social media accounts and visit our websites for more information. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.